something that I'm trying to bring into YouTube with my admittedly very small channel is the notion to get away from being locked into one camera brand and doing things one way. The world of YouTube is very different from what I know as the working world of photography. I'm a professional photographer, I'm a full-time working photographer. On YouTube, there aren't actually very many of them. Most photographers on YouTube are primarily YouTubers. I don't have any problem with that, but it does start to lock people into, I'm a Canon photographer, I'm a Nikon photographer, a Fuji photographer, and so on. And my experience of the working world is nothing like that whatsoever. I know quite a lot of professional photographers, and for us, cameras are simply tools. We'll use different brands, different lenses, different camera bodies within different brands to achieve different looks and do different things. For instance, a Nikon D4 might be very good for fast action stuff, whereas a D800 with its high megapixel count lends itself to slower, more considered photography. Just as you see a different range of camera bodies within one manufacturer, they have different strengths and weaknesses. The same goes from system to system as well, where a professional photographer will buy something as a tool, because if we're making money from using that kit, it pays itself off and it's worthwhile. That's why I say that almost all of the professional photographers I know own more than one camera system. Well, I said to myself that when my D600 died, I would go and buy a D800 to replace it, and that's exactly what I've done. The D800 for me is probably going to be my #1 landscape photography camera. Landscape photography is going to be something you're going to see a lot more of on this channel in the future. The first big bonus of using the D800 for landscape photography is simply that it's not so expensive that if I break it doing landscape photography, that I'm going to start crying over the fact that I've broken an expensive camera when I haven't. They just don't cost that much. They're relatively cheap. For what they are, they're relatively cheap now. And that's good because it means I'm going to work harder when I'm working with a camera out in more harsh environments. I'm not going to baby it. I'm just going to get on with it. Having a really expensive camera for landscape photography that you feel that you need to protect because you've got a lot of money invested into it, in my opinion, is not a great way to go for landscape photography. It's better to buy an older camera that's cheaper, that doesn't mean so much to you financially, that you can then go out and just use and get on with the job. That really makes a big difference, and it's one of my main tips for people looking at camera systems. Think to yourself, how much is it going to annoy you if you break it, and therefore how much is it going to restrict you in your usage because you're trying to be ultra careful with it. Do you see what I mean? It makes a big difference because you think, well, I'm not sure if I want to take it out now, or I'm not sure about putting it in this location, I might damage it. That doesn't get you the best pictures. It's better to have a cheaper camera that you're less worried about scratching and denting and all that kind of stuff. Now, one of the first major reasons that I want the D800 for landscape photography is because of its dynamic range. Now, there are issues with the way that people talk about dynamic range on YouTube, and one of the first ones is that, well, why don't you just expose properly? The difficulty with exposing properly is you cannot expose properly for a high dynamic range scene on most cameras, simply for the fact that the camera doesn't have the dynamic range to capture it. So you will end up with either unrecoverable shadows or unrecoverable highlights. The way to get around it, and the way I do that with my Canon systems, is that I bracket the exposures. I take usually around 3 shots, one for the highlights, one for the shadows, and one for the midtones. And then that requires the extra additional processing afterwards. The downside with that is, one, you actually have to do the extra work to blend them together. And 2 is that you are in the process of blending exposures together, blending different photos together, which usually match up, but they may not match up perfectly. But I always think it's simply easier if you can get everything in one shot. And so with the D800, the dynamic range is such, and it was the same with the D600, you can simply expose for the highlights, and that's all you have to do. It's one shot. You don't have to blend. It's very, very rare that you have to blend exposures together. With the Nikon cameras, the dynamic range sits at the low end where all the shadows are, and at lower ISOs as well. Speaking about that, it's kind of a thing that not many people are aware of, is that with the Nikons, and I guess the Sonys probably as well, is most of the dynamic range sits at the low ISOs. You lose that benefit once you go above 800 or 1000 ISO or so. Now, that for me is not an issue, because for landscapes I'm shooting on a tripod, so that it's completely irrelevant. It will be almost always at ISO 100, unless it's some nighttime shot where I want to go much higher. And then I'm not going to worry about it anyway, because I expect the dark areas to stay dark, so I can crush any introduced noise in that sense. So the dynamic range being in the low ISO range it suits me perfectly for what I want to do with this camera. And the next point for me is to do with the megapixel count of the camera. 36 megapixels is a good blend for me. I don't need more than 24, but it is nice to have a few more for landscapes. I'm going to be opening up a print shop soon. I'll leave a link in the description for my website in case you're watching this after I've opened the print shop. Around 36 megapixels though is great for landscapes. It's nowadays not such a big file that computers will struggle with it, but it's certainly big enough to give your prints a bit of a boost, especially if you do any cropping. And the next reason is that cameras like the Nikon D800 and my old Nikon D3S and so on, they are, I believe, the toughest built cameras out there. I don't think anything by any other manufacturer comes close. I really don't. They are just so unbelievably strong and rugged and durable. And in some of the environments that I want to shoot in, that will make a difference and that will help. I think it's a bonus feature to some degree because you're not obviously throwing the camera around, but also, I think just in those kind of environments, damage does happen and it's nice to have a strong camera. And the next reason is that these larger Nikon camera bodies have a very well thought out, very highly evolved user interface. All of the buttons are large and well separated. This is a big camera body. Because of the size of the camera body, all of the controls can be well spaced out. You've got to remember, Nikon have been making cameras for a very, very long time. And so the control layout is highly evolved. And sometimes people don't think too much about what's a camera like to use with gloves on. How easy is it to press the buttons when your hands are really cold? These things matter to me. Can I feel the texture differences? Do I get good confirmation when I'm pressing buttons? Can I feel what I'm doing? Because I work for my landscapes in very cold environments. And whilst, yes, you can have the kind of fingerless gloves and so on, being able to touch and control and feel what you're doing properly does make a difference. Having that layout like that is much less frustrating to work with, especially if you're working for long time periods in colder conditions. This doesn't mean I can't do these jobs with a 5D Classic like this. I can do them with that. It's just that the D800 is going to be better at it. And my 5D Classic takes better portraits than the D800 will. It's simply different tools for different jobs. And that's the way to look at these things. I don't want to baby any of my camera gear. I'd rather be buying used stuff that's at a cheaper price, that's older like the D800 is, and then just think, right, get on with it and use it and not worry about it. Because in the end, and this is a really key point, that you are the photographer, the cameras are the tools, you're just transferring your skills through the different cameras that you use. And ultimately, if the camera that you're picking to do a job, and you must see it as a tool to do that, if it can do the job well, if it's got any particular traits or outstanding features like the D800 does with its dynamic range and its megapixels, it's going to do well for landscape photography. So that's what I'll use something like that for. It has benefits that are going to help me when I apply my skill set to that camera. And that's all it is. And so the latest cameras don't excel or surpass what the D800's doing because they don't have anything more in dynamic range to give me. And there's no features on them that are benefiting me for that job for landscapes any more than the D800 does. So why would I buy something more expensive? It's not a sensible move. If you're wondering what lenses I'm going to be using with this camera, I've bought the 24-120 f4 VR. I used to have this lens in the past and it's a decent lens. It's not like super sharp, but it's definitely sharp enough. I find more and more that my landscape photography is sitting in the middle focal ranges. I like the sort of decluttering effect of the middle focal ranges, but not getting into that oversimplification where there isn't really a subject. If I want to take wider shots, I can do a panorama with the lens at 24mm. If I want to, I could crop in a little bit from 120, use the megapixels in the camera to get a slightly longer reach from the lens without suffering too much degradation of image quality. And so just messing around with the camera so far, how have I found it? Well, I found it to be very good. First thing I noticed is incredibly heavy, which is downside to it definitely, but it's not so heavy as to be an issue because I'm not going to be taking a heap of lenses with it, so that helps. If I can work this, I might get away with just one lens for landscape photography. Maybe. We'll see how it goes, but hopefully, and then it's okay. Really love the control layout. and the spacing of it all. I think in the colder weather that I'm shooting in, it's just going to be so nice to have that well thought out, well designed layout. And overall, it's just nice having a big camera again. The feeling in the hand and the ergonomics of it is just great. I very much like that. The camera feels so competently designed and well made that it gives you a lot of faith in it and its features and what it's going to do. I think the focus system on it seems to be very good. The screen on the back of it which is what I'm going to be using like 99% of the time, isn't the most high resolution, but it's a very sharp screen. So what it lacks in absolute resolution, it makes up for in sharpness. It's very easy to tell what's in focus and where your focus is. The camera is also highly customizable, as all Nikon cameras always are. You can set all the different control buttons and function buttons to do so many various different things. And I will run through my setup for it as well, how I've set the camera up, because I've made quite a few changes to the standard layout. So far, so good. I'm very happy with what I've seen from it so far. It reminds me very much of my D800, which are my most used camera for the longest period of time, I guess. It just feels like the beefed up Big Brother version of the D600 to me, which is what I was hoping for. So there's been no nasty surprises. Everything's been pretty much what I expected to get. Please subscribe to my channel if you want to see some of the photos that I make with this camera in the future. Give me a like if you enjoyed this video, and give me a comment. Let me know what you're shooting, what your gear is, and any thoughts you have on the video. Thanks, take care, bye bye.